Now, soaring electricity and fears of gas shortages are going to dominate talks between federal and state energy ministers in Canberra today.
On the agenda at the COAG meeting will be what's described as the biggest reforms to national energy in more than a decade. Chairing that meeting will be the Federal Energy and Environment Minister Josh Frydenberg, who joins us now from Parliament House. Good morning to you, Josh Frydenberg. Thank you so much for your time.
Nice to be with you, Del.
So could you tell us what has triggered this meeting of energy ministers?
Well, we meet twice a year, the energy ministers from the states and the territories. It's important because the national electricity market involves cooperative federalism, namely it's not the Commonwealth who is sovereign in itself, nor is it the states and the territories. There are shared responsibilities. So we are looking at a whole series of measures today to stabilise the market, to ensure more affordable electricity, but obviously to take into account the lower emissions future, which we all support.
Now, you talked about more affordable electricity. Electricity and gas prices are soaring across the country, but perhaps nowhere as much as we've seen in South Australia. Can you talk us a little bit about what you think is behind the South Australian power crisis? Because it is a state that's leading by example in the renewable energies area.
Well, you're right. There was extreme volatility in South Australia. In fact, in the one day, the spot price for electricity went from around $500 a megawatt hour to $14,000 a megawatt hour, and you can imagine how problematic that is for households and for businesses. But it was a complex range of factors that led to that. Primarily the Hayward Interconnector, which provides electricity from Victoria into South Australia, mainly coal-fired electricity, was actually being upgraded, so it wasn't at full capacity. There was also a cold snap in both South Australia and Victoria, which meant that there was an increase in demand. There was a spike in gas prices, and we have a tight domestic gas market because we're exporting more LNG to other parts of the world. But also the intermittent nature of some of the renewables, particularly wind and solar, means that electricity is not being generated when the wind's not blowing or the sun is not shining, and that does create issues for the grid in terms of creating a stable, consistent flow of electricity supply.
But as a country, as we move towards a more sustainable future and to implementing more renewable energies across the nation, how do we ensure that what we've seen happen in South Australia doesn't take place across the country where we don't have this massive spike in gas and electricity prices?
Well, you're right. We do support an increase in renewables, and we're going from around 15% of our electricity mix today coming from renewables to 23% by 2020. One of the ways we stop that volatility, or at least keep a lid on some of that volatility, is ensure that there is sufficient gas to come into the market, because when the wind is not blowing, as I said, and the sun is not shining, you need that base load peaking capacity, which gas can provide. So we'll be discussing today a number of measures to boost gas supply, but also to boost liquidity and transparency in gas markets. The other important initiative is around interconnectors between states, so that when a state needs more electricity, that another state that produces surplus electricity can supply that. And South Australia has asked for an interconnector with New South Wales. That will be subject to a determination by the Australian Energy Regulator. We're looking to truncate that long process so a decision can be made in a quicker time frame, and that will obviously be important.
And just on that point about the interconnectors, as you mentioned, South Australia has asked for another one. The cost of that would be approximately $500 million. Whose responsibility is it? Who's going to foot the bill? Who's going to pay for this?
Well, you're right to say that the cost of an interconnector is ultimately borne by the consumers, and the Energy Regulator has a complex process to determine which consumers will benefit most, and then will apportion the cost accordingly. Look, we've got to see for that independent process to run its course. It's a rigorous process. It's not for the politicians to say that Energy Regulator should approve a particular interconnector, but what we can do as the policymakers is to ensure that the red tape is removed so a green or a red light decision can be made in a quicker time frame.
So Josh Frydenberg, can Australia reach its 25% renewable energy target and not have consumers paying through the roof prices on power?
Well, obviously, the renewable energy target does have an impact on prices because the cost of production of wind and solar can be more than it would be for, say, coal. or indeed for gas, but the cost of renewables is coming down dramatically, and that's a very important story to tell. So in the last 7 years alone, the cost of wind has come down by about 80%, and the cost of solar PV has come down by 50%. And as we adapt to new technologies like battery storage, the capacity for renewables is going to be much greater, and this is something that the Australian government is investing in through the work we do through the Clean Energy Finance Corporation, through ARENA, and that many companies across the country are also investing in. If we can provide better battery storage for both households, and we have very high take-up of solar PV among Australian households, the highest on a per capita basis in the world at some 15%, as well as across businesses, then I think this will be a very good story for renewable energy in the years to come.
All right, Josh Frydenberg, thank you so much for your time this morning.
Nice to be with you, Del.
Now, before